We all went inside and looked for ways to try to ease our minds. Forced into a change, I guess it had to be this way. But do your best to try to stay away. The day they closed the world, we all went inside, looking for the light. The day they closed the world, we all realized what it means to try, to hold on to the love. Don't you be afraid. There come a time when you will have your say. And don't forget to pray the Lord to keep us safe. We will live to fight another day. The day they closed the world, we all went inside, looking for the light. The day they closed the world, we all realized what it means to try. I can feel it coming, I can see it miles away. I can feel the sun of brighter days. I can hear the laughter, I can see your smiling face. I can feel the love that's on the way. The day they closed the world, we all went inside, looking for the light. The day they closed the world, we all realized what it means to try. The day they closed the world, we all went outside, looking for the light. I can feel it coming, I can see it miles away. I can feel the sun of brighter days. I can hear the laughter, I can see your smiling face. I can feel the love that's on the way. I can feel it coming, I can feel it coming. I can feel it coming, I can feel it coming. The day they close the world.
Do not be Saf is here, and welcome to Saf Surgery and Inspirational People and Inspirational Stories. Wow, 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 wow! What a guest we got today. But before I introduce him, I'm in direct collaboration with Spiritually Gone Wild and Love Culture Academy, and yeah, my name's Saf, and you know me. Every Thursday, I'm here, 8 p.m. UK live. You get me live. Now Today I've got a guest of all guests. You know, the reason for my show that I do, Inspirational People, Inspirational Stories, is to bring people like my guest today in front of everyone to share a story of inspiration. And today I have a young lad. I say young because I remember him when he was a young lad. He's about the same age as me, to be fair. Before I tell you, he's the son of one of the most talked about models um, back in the day. A beautiful, beautiful woman called Christine Keeler. Now, when Christine was 19 years old, she was caught up in a major, major political sex scandal in the 60s, and that really could have brought the British government, brought down the British government. But her son is here today, Seymour Platt, and we're going to hear the side of Christine that not many people know about. Seymour will reveal what life was like for him growing up with his mother, and what it was like um, hearing about certain stories about his famous mother, and how it affected him in his life. He will tell her that he will tell us a story about why he believes that Christine Keeler, his mum, did not deserve to go to prison. We're going to hear what Seymour says. We're going to hear about the real Christine Keeler, and we're going to hear it from Seymour Platt. And without further ado, Seymour, come and say hi, my man. What's up, Seymour?
Hi, Saf. How are you?
Oh, top of the world. You know what? I'm so happy that you had to have you on my show finally, man. How you doing?
Saf, you look so much older than you did when I was in school. I mean,
What?
it's just like...
But if you remember, just so the audience know, myself and Seymour, we went to the same school. Um, yeah, I mean, I can mention it because it's no longer around. It's a school called Pierpont School.
Yeah.
So big up to everyone who's watching from Pierpont School.
Hello to anybody there.
Yeah, well, let's see. I mean, we've had good times, we had bad times at that school, but I mean, that's how I know Seymour. In fact, we were in a play together. We acted in a play together.
We did, didn't we? Was it? It was The Magistrate.
You know what? That's the name.
It
I
was.
was. It was.
And
Yeah.
I had to kiss somebody now, Saf. I can't remember. Was it you that I kissed?
You did. You kissed me. You
There we
kissed me.
go. Yeah,
And
that's
yeah,
it.
but it wasn't that kind. We'll let the viewers know it wasn't that kind of play. Basically, I was a French waiter called Isidore, and Seymour played the head waiter. I
Yeah.
can't remember his name. Pierre or something, or
But I got to
Francois.
kiss everybody. It was great.
Yeah, well, it was because it was acting. I allowed it, Seymour. Otherwise, I don't really, not that I have anything.
Hey,
Anyway,
I'm the
but
same. Anything for
yeah,
the part, you know.
anything, anything for the part, exactly. But and
And it's great
it
to
was
see you, stuff, and it's good because we do this lockdown, and I think the lockdown has let us reach out to each other. Like
that's right.
so many people are reaching out to each other again with
Yeah,
this lockdown. There is good that comes from this.
there is
Obviously,
good.
there's terrible death that comes from this, but there is some good that comes from this if we can reach out to each other.
Well, exactly, and reach out to people we don't even know, and I think that's why I do what I do, and I think also I feel so grateful that you've actually come on, not one because I know you, because it's lovely to have someone who I know, and again, people think I know you like my best mate. I haven't seen you for 30 odd years, probably.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's been about that.
uh,
Yeah,
I haven't seen you physically, face to face. I mean, I've
yeah,
seen you in Zoom a couple of times, but
yeah,
not physically for 30 odd years.
yeah.
Um, I'm getting a few messages here.
Okay.
Suzanne, this is Saf Surgery, Suzanne. This is Saf Surgery, if you're wondering what we are. But yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, and the reason why I'm honoured to have you on is because I remember at school, near the end of my time at school, you may have just left or whatever. There was a film that came out called Scandal.
It was.
Uh, yeah, the film is not just about your mum, Christine Keeler, but it's also about Mandy Rice Davis, and what happened with they call it the
Yeah, yeah.
perfumer
The
scandal, and
fumo
it was only
scandal.
perfumer scandal.
Yeah.
That's it. And it was only then I heard that Christine Keeler was your mum. It it,
Yeah.
it was sort of kept hush hush. Whether you knew through your teenage years what had happened then, I'm assuming you
Oh
did.
no, I did, and you know, Saf, it's funny because uh, it wasn't like I didn't grow up with a vow of secrecy, but it was something that I didn't talk about because I didn't know how people would react. I didn't know certainly that people of our age would care because we were all kids. But in the last term when we were in school together, I did go with one of the school friends that we had, a guy called Brendan, to the set of Scandal, and that was really interesting because I then began to realize that there was a big film coming out, and the film Scandal actually played really well in America. It played one of the biggest films in America, actually. The producers were Harvey Weinstein, the Miramax.
Good old Harvey Weinstein.
Good old Harvey Weinstein. And I know that when we were on the set, some of the girls were saying, some of the actresses, were saying, or actors were saying, that it's a great movie. They're really pleased working on it, but there's producers and they just keep trying to get everyone to take their clothes off all the time. And of course, all those years later, we sort of see, that would have been Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah.
So, you know.
God. And so, yeah, I mean, we could talk about
it's very big, you know, and we went over to America. My mother and I went over to America to publicize the film. And so this would have been just after I left school. And I got 2-3 weeks in America going everywhere in a limousine. We were with John Hurt, the actor John Hurt, going from set to going from interview to interview. And we did New York and we went to Philadelphia. She went on to LA. I came back to the UK. We did Miami. We also went to Canada with Toronto.
the Toronto Film Festival. Yeah,
it was absolutely fantastic. It was an experience of a lifetime, and we were staying in. They put us up in the best of places. We're on the Ritz-Carlton next to Trump Tower in New York. So it was a great experience. It was a very successful film. It was just a pity that Chris didn't financially sort of reap the reward from that.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, without actually talking about the actual film Scandal itself.
Oh yeah.
And before going about talking about what you know and your childhood, was the film Scandal true? Yeah, was it a true reflection of your mum?
No, well, so just a sort of catch up on what the story was. Back in the early 1960s, my mother was unbelievably beautiful. And she caught the eye of the then Secretary of State for War, Minister for War, a man called John Jack Perfumer. John Perfumer, known to his friends as Jack. And they had an affair. Christine, at the same time, was living a very bohemian life, was staying with friends, and the story leaked that she was having an affair with the Minister for War, and it did bring down the government because the Minister for War stood up in Parliament. He lied. He said he never met Christine Keeler, and that came back to bite him that he'd lied. It was such a big story at the time in the UK and actually around the world that you could argue for a brief time in 1963, without any doubt, Christine was the most famous woman in the world. It brought down the Macmillan government because they were seen as being very out of touch. They handled it very badly. It was a massive change in culture for the UK. The press before this were quite subservient. They became very powerful after this. Their sales tripled. They made lots of money, and they were suddenly a force to be reckoned with. And it's a force that we still live with today. We ushered in it was certainly the beginning of the swinging 60s. It was the beginning of the sexual revolution. And before the Profumo scandal, there was almost in the UK a subservience to people in power, to the ruling class. And I think the Profumo scandal just swept that away. Suddenly there was satire. You had that was the week that was. You had Peter Sellers doing satire and really ripping into the government. And that just came on the back of the Profumo scandal that did so much to dent the way things were. So it was a big deal.
Yeah. Your mum had a friend, Mandy Rice.
Yeah.
Is she still alive, Mandy, or?
No, Mandy Rice Davis died a few years ago now. She had cancer and she passed away before Chris. It's an interesting story because although she was a friend, and she was around Christine at the time. And you look at the story, most of the agency that came from the story was from Chris or from Stephen Ward. And Stephen Ward was the guy that she was living with. The story's further complicated because Christine also had a very brief liaison with a man called Eugene Ivanov, who was the Soviet naval attaché. At the same time that she was just about to start her affair with Jack Profumo, the Minister for War. It was further complicated because in a comment, well, there is a lot of, I'm going to choose this correctly, there is suspicion that Stephen Ward may have been a spy. He certainly asked Christine if she could get information from the Minister of War. I'm not sure how tongue-in-cheek that comment was, and I'm really not sure how tongue-in-cheek that comment was from him. It's the sort of thing I would say, to be honest. And that brought in that there were spying allegations linked to the story as well. Interestingly, though, and it took me a long time to realise this, it was really a story about abuse that my mum went through. Because very early on, Stephen Ward, on a night out, they went to a nightclub called the Rio. And at this nightclub, Stephen said, look, could you do me a favour? Could you just go and score me some dope, some marijuana, some cannabis? And Chris met a man called Lucky Gordon, and she brought some drugs through him. Lucky Gordon was so enamoured with Chris that he insisted that if she got his telephone, if he got her telephone number, then maybe he might be able to get her stuff in the future, or introduce her friends to women that he knows. So Chris gave her telephone number. She was living with Stephen Ward, and that moment on started a long cycle of stalking and abuse and rape that ultimately led to very poor decisions being made that brought down Jack Profumo's career, that brought down the government, and ended with Christine going to prison. And most tragically, actually ended with the suicide of Stephen Ward.
Just so people are aware, when you say Chris, that's what you used to call
mum.
your mum. Yeah, that's what you used to call your mum.
Actually, it's interesting because I was brought up without a father figure. My father and my mother divorced when I was very young, and they separated when I was about 6 months. And I didn't know my father for a very, very long time. Didn't meet him for many, many years. And I think it's symptomatic of people who are brought up by just one parent. Their relationship's a little bit different because they're a mother and a father. And so I called my mum Chris. And it wasn't out of a disrespect, and it wasn't out of a lack of love. It's just that relationship was, I think, a little bit more complex. She wasn't an authoritarian figure for me growing up. She was my mother and my father, all wrapped up into one, but also a friend, because sometimes it did feel as if it was us against the rest of the world.
During that time, and in particular afterwards, there was a lot of insults towards your mother, calling her a sex worker and calling her this and calling her that. How did she get through all that? Do you know? Did you ever speak to her about it? Did she ever mention this?
I did. So, Saf, I just for you, and I know that you're sort of qualified in this area. This is an area that you're particularly interested in. And I know that my mother suffered a lot of violence towards her, sexual violence towards her. A lot of the men in her life were violent towards her, and that definitely scarred her, and it definitely had it changed the way I think that she thought about relationships with men. When I was growing up, there were very few men in her life. She didn't trust men in that way. But as far as the insults are concerned, so what happened was that Stephen Ward was seen as a threat because of the spying element to the story. And also because he, in a kind of an Epstein sort of a way, would get young, beautiful girls around him and introduce them to his powerful, rich friends. And if anything happens, it happens. Very Epsteinian, you know? And I think the establishment wanted to get rid of him. So there was a trial. He was charged with being a pimp, living off the immoral earnings of these women around him. And one of these women that he was charged with living off the immoral earnings of was my mother. Well, Chris was very sexually liberated because she wasn't a prostitute. And it's interesting when you look at the events that sort of led to the trial and the people that they brought in order to get Stephen Ward and really convict him of this crime. There was one woman that they brought in who actually confessed on stage that on the stand that the police had told her that if she doesn't say that she was a prostitute working for Stephen Ward, they'd take her children away. And still the trial rumbled on. There was Mandy Rice Davis. Now, Mandy Rice Davis had apparently slept with a man on her basis and at Stephen's flat and received 20 quid. But again, she was just a young girl who was given a gift.
This is what I'm saying. Your mum was 19.
She was 19, exactly. And she was therefore accused of being a prostitute in order to convict Stephen Ward. Now, the conviction of Stephen Ward is one of the worst miscarriages of justice in British legal history. It just is disgusting what happened. You have witnesses who stand on trial saying, well, listen, the police are coercing me to say something that isn't true, and still the trial rumbles on. And still they find him guilty. And Stephen Ward, on the night before they found him guilty, knowing they were going to find him guilty, took an overdose of barbiturates, and 3 days later he died. Very sadly, you know. So the story it's an awful story, but because of that, Christine was called a prostitute. Now, you know, she just wasn't a prostitute, you know. But in later life, she would talk about herself, and I think on reflection as well, that she would look back and she'd say things like, well, maybe I was, because I would just sleep with men and they would give me gifts because I was beautiful. Does that make me a prostitute? And it doesn't. And it's taken me as a man a really long time to, I think, unpick the complexities of what it is. Look, I'm not a woman, but certainly the complexities of my mother and the situation that she was in. And I think the situation that my mother found herself in was very similar to the situation that lots of women find themselves in. A lot of men look at a woman and they see either a mother, a child, or a prostitute. And women are more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And you know, it's my mother was more complicated than that. She enjoyed sex. She was famously quoted in an interview saying she didn't really like sex. Well, that was also in her nature as well. She would be contrary. Of course she did. She wouldn't have done everything she did if she didn't. Chris's problem was that men became obsessed with her because of how beautiful she was.
And she was. I mean, she's absolutely beautiful. I wish I had a picture I could put her on, put up to show everyone. But you know what? And it was quite common because I don't know if you saw the Piers Morgan interview with Joan Collins. They did a remake yesterday. There's similarities there. Similarities. Joan Collins was, I think, a young 19-year-old when she got married at a very young age, and she was involved in a very abusive relationship, and she was branded as a prostitute and as a slag and this and that and the other, because she was quite a beautiful young lady, and she had so many marriages.
You should mention Joan Collins there, Saf. I'm sorry. You
said
Joan Collins. Joan Collins is one of the first actors to play the part of Christine Keeler anyway.
Oh wow, really? Where was that?
And she did this, and it's funny. It's one of the things that. So I built this website, and one of the reasons I built the website. Let me put it up. It's on the bottom there. Yeah. and I think was to talk about, initially it was to talk about Chris as an icon. There was a big art exhibition at the beginning of the year, and I didn't want all of that work that the artists and the poets and the musicians had put in to be lost. And I thought it would be a nice thing to put that on a website. And I thought it would also be a nice thing to sort of look at the people who played Christine in the roles as an actor. And Joan Collins played her in a part with Peter Sellers in very, very soon after the events. And funny enough, there's a quote from Peter Sellers. I've written it down here, where Peter Sellers in this, I think it's called Rude Britannia. And it came out in 1963. They played it in New York. It was banned in the UK, but it came out on tape after, or on, what is the LP? That's it. And Peter Sellers' quote from it, one of his quotes from it is, Macmillan, the Prime Minister of the UK, says that we have the most brilliant spies in the UK. Unfortunately, they're Russian. It was a very funny line. I don't think I could deliver Peter Sellers' line very well there.
Peter Sellers, God, yeah. Wow. I love that. I love that.
So Joan Collins was one of the first actresses to ever play the role.
Oh, really?
And there's been a lot of actresses that have played the part of Christine in theatre, television.
Who's your favourite then? Who's your favourite actress who's played your mum to the T?
That's a good question. Sophie Cookson played her most recently in a BBC drama, and I thought that she did a very good job. Actually, there were occasions that she would have mannerisms that did remind me of my mum.
And who was the actor? Who was the actor in Scandal then? Who played?
It was a girl called Joanne Wally Kilmer. She was.
There was a similar look, I think, with the black hair.
I think she looked more like my mother, but she was lovely. Yeah, she was lovely.
I was wondering, did the royal family at the time ever make a comment about what was going on in the 60s?
No, well, they don't. They wouldn't. Of course. Who's married to Queen? I've forgotten his name. The Prince of Wales. No, not Prince of Wales.
Duke of Edinburgh.
Duke of Edinburgh. That's it. My memory just went completely befuddled there. He's often linked with the story. He was linked in The Crown TV series with the story, and he's linked as well because Stephen Ward did drawings and sketches of people. And one of the people that he did a sketch of was the Duke of Edinburgh. And if you go to Clifton, there are 2 sketches by Stephen Ward up in one of the rooms, and one of them is of Christine, and one of them is of the Duke of Edinburgh, and they're right next to each other, and people were sort of taking inference from that. Now, I don't know. I can tell you that I've been told stories which don't make any sense, just are completely unbelievable, and I don't believe them. So I'm not as a person. I don't really fall into believing in conspiracy theories. I believe very much in what I can see and what I can prove.
What I was interested to know, Seymour, is how was it as a young child slowly learning about your mum and hearing rumours and hearing about what she was involved with? I mean, when did you first learn about this? I mean, you must have been a young lad when you first learned about this.
Well, I always knew Saf. It was always part of the dialogue. My mother was off doing interviews, and there'd be journalists around who did interviews, and I just thought that was normal. What I would do is I wouldn't talk to people about it, not because it wouldn't come up. And I never really have talked to people about it. There'd be lots of people that I've worked with that I know over the years who wouldn't know that my mother was Christine Keeler because it just never came up in conversation. And also I think that a lot of people that you meet are less interested in hearing another person's story. They're much more interested in telling their own story.
Mm.
So I know very recently as well, with the drama that came out, and I appeared on Good Morning Britain, and I got back to work the next day, and I'll never forget it. I had one of the guys came over and said, "Oh yes, I see your mum's Christine Keeler, and there's a big drama on TV about that, and you were on tell her yesterday being interviewed, you find it interesting, but I knew somebody famous once, and they proceeded to sit down for 10 minutes and tell me about somebody that I knew, which is fine. I just thought that is people. That is a lot of people. They're not necessarily that interested in somebody else's story.
But this story was massive in the 60s, and when that film came out, Scandal in particular, I think everyone was intrigued, and so was I. And only later on, I found out that she was your mum, and it was like, wow.
Well,
It was...
I grew up around people that either knew the story who were friends of Chris, but in school nobody knew it. Nobody cared because we were all kids. There was only one time that it ever came up, and it was funny because one of the kids in school, in our school, told me a joke.
Who was it, Seymour? Tell me, who was it?
Well,
Do I know?
I won't be that indiscreet, but he had no idea who my mum was. But the punchline was along the lines of, Christine Keeler does this, and isn't she just easy? An easy sexual conquest is the punchline of the joke, and I said to the guy, that's my mum, and he had no idea, and he was mortified. And I mean, I can tell you that is the extent of the harrowing bullying that I went through. That somebody accidentally told me a joke and apologized profusely afterwards. So I can't tell you a sad story about this or a hard luck story. It really wasn't unusual or odd. It was interesting, but then people get on with their own lives.
Before we get on about your relationship with Mum and how things were later on in life, I have to ask this question. I want to. People will know about the story, but the infamous photo.
Yeah.
You know the one I'm talking. The one with the chair.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, have you got it? Because I'd love to have it on, because that photo is iconic. That photo is. That's the one. Look at that.
Well, look
come on, yeah. Look at that. That is world famous.
One of the most famous pictures in the world. There's and it is iconic. It's it was taken. Christine was going to be in a film about her life, and her company, Mill Warren at the time, engaged Lewis Morley to take pictures of her for publicity for this film that she was going to be in. And they used the Establishment Club, and there was a photo place there that they took pictures. Then that would be later on the place where Peter Cook would do and Dudley Moore would do their satire. And there was just the chair there, and Lewis Morley said, "Well, we'll use this." And Chris said, "Well, I've used everything else in the room for pictures because I've had other photos taken here." And there was a string of pictures, and this is the most iconic one. There are other really good pictures that Lewis Morley took that day as well, but it was all done very quickly. Apparently, she was told when she turned up that she had to be nude for it, but she refused. So in actual fact, in that picture, she's got her knickers hitched up, and she's topless, but she's got her knickers hitched up, and it became a really famous picture. It was. Soon after it was taken, it was leaked or stolen or just given to the newspapers, who ran with it, and it became the iconic image.
Amazing.
And it's one of the most famous images of its time. It's great. It's a great privilege for me to now be a custodian of that and that image of my mum.
And what happened to the chair? Did it go in auction, I hear, or was that just a rumour?
It's in the Victorian and Albert Museum.
Really?
So Lewis Morley, and again, it's funny, on my website, I've got another page dedicated to this chair, and all the people that have sat on that chair or have copied it. And you'll be amazed at some of the people that have copied that pose. So on the website, Lindsay Lohan or Russell Brand. You know Russell Brand, don't you?
I know Russell, yeah, I know Russell.
He sat on the chair and he's done the pose, and but the actual chair itself was in the V&A, and everyone who sat on that chair. So David Frost, he signed it, and Dame Edna Everidge, she signed it, and it sits there now. So it belonged to Lewis Morley, and he just gifted it to them. So if you want to see the chair, you can go down and see it.
Definitely, definitely. Moving on, Seymour, and this is the bit where I want the world to know the real Christine Keeler. But before we get to that, what was your relationship like? I mean, obviously you already touched upon it that she was mum and dad in one. Chris can be mum or dad, but how was your relationship with her, and what can you share with us that people would not know at all about her character, about her smile, about her laughter that you've mentioned in the past?
Oh no, she did have a fantastic laugh, and she had a great sense of humour, and she loved to laugh, and she loved to play practical jokes. But I think her favourite thing in all the world was to say something that would really shock people, or just turn them on and surprise them.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah. An example being, most recently, there was a good friend of hers that knew her for years, and it genuinely turned around to me and said, like your mother told me that she was very, very prudish, and she would never let a man see her naked, not even her husband. And I looked at him and I said, she did nude photo shoots. She was pulling your leg. It's just like, she was just having you on.
Yeah. Wow.
But that was just, that's what she would do. And our relationship was, I think, typical of a mother and daughter, or mother and son. Jesus, I just call myself a girl there. But where we would, I was growing up, I was a teenager, I wanted my own life. I didn't always express massive interest in what she'd been through, but she wasn't very good at explaining it either. And I think that she lost her voice on it as well. She was for so long pilloried, and really, people would say awful things about her and dismiss anything she said. An example would be, whether or not she had sex with Eugene Ivanov on a night that she said she had sex. Now, Eugene Ivanov said that she had sex. She said that they went back and they had sex. But there's a lot of politics. There are a lot of people out there, historians out there, that say, oh, well, they couldn't possibly have had sex. Two people say they have sex, and why? You're just saying that she's lying to call her a liar. And that kind of brings me around to, she went to prison. So after everything, and you bear in mind, there are two stories here, and they run in parallel. And the one story is about Stephen Ward and everything that happened to him that ended with his suicide. Well, one of the things that happened to Stephen, and that was primarily because Christine was being stalked, had been raped on occasion by a man called Lucky Gordon, in quite horrific rapes as well. And he continued to stalk her. She brought charges against him, and then was threatened by the family and dropped the charges against her. She would then talk to anybody who could help her with this problem that she had with Lucky Gordon. And one of the people that she spoke to was a guy called John Lewis, who was an MP, an ex-Labour MP. And she went to John Lewis at a party, and John Lewis was sitting at this party in Christmas 1962. And she said, and he was saying that he knew solicitors that could do anything. And she was saying, well, I've got this real problem with this guy who just won't leave me alone. He's raped me twice, and he keeps calling, and he keeps turning up where I am, and he's stalking me. Although that wasn't a language, because that wasn't a word there. And he said, well, I know lawyers, but who are you, effectively? And she said, well, I'm somebody as well. I've recently been having an affair with Jack Profumo. Oh. And that was a ching moment. So John Lewis, who was an ex-Labour MP, took that piece of information and went back and told the likes of Harold Wilson and Barbara Castle. Barbara Castle raised that in the Commons. This led to Jack Fumo lying about having met Christine Keeler. This led to him losing his job and his career. Everything that happens in the story, every single story, is to do with Chris trying to get away from this guy called Lucky Gordon. Johnny Edgecombe, he was a guy who shot up, fired shots at the house that Chris was in, hiding there from Mandy with Mandy Rice Davis, and that brought the press to Wimpole Street because there was somebody throwing a gun around shooting at models in a posh house in Chelsea in Belgravia. And he was doing that because a couple of nights before there was an altercation with Lucky Gordon and him, where Lucky Gordon was trying to get to Chris, and Lucky Gordon and Johnny Edgecombe, defending Chris, had pulled out a razor and slashed Lucky Gordon's face. All the way through this story, it's the story of Chris trying to get away from this guy called Lucky Gordon. In April 1963, my mother was going to a nightclub with some friends. She was in Devonshire Street, and she came down the stairs, and Lucky Gordon was waiting outside. She was the first person there. Lucky Gordon instantly laid in and attacked her. He slapped her. Apparently, he kicked her to the ground. He kicked her several times. She got up. She ran for the door. He pushed her into the door frame. Her friend was the next person down, a girl called Hamilton. And she saw what was happening. She ran up the stairs to call the police. Two other friends came down, and they were West Indian guys that they were with. And they got rid of Lucky Gordon. They said, "On your way, son, get out of here." Chris went back upstairs with her friend Paula Hamilton and the two West Indian guys, and Paula said, "I've called the police." And the two West Indian guys in 1963 said, "Excuse me, I don't want anything to do with this. You know, the police turn up, it's bad for us." One of them was on bail, and the other one was a married man who just didn't want his name involved with being anywhere near anybody who wasn't his wife. And they begged the guys, "Just say we weren't there. It doesn't matter. We weren't really involved." So Chris said, "Okay." You know, again, guys persuading Chris to do something that isn't in her best interest. The police turned up, and these two guys, they hid in another room. So when Chris gave her evidence, she told the story as is, but didn't mention the two guys. Police doctor came around. Police doctor saw the wounds that she had. She was bruising. And she was bloody. She was bloody from a cut that she had just above her eye. The cut just above her eye had been opened up, but earlier in the day there was another guy who had hit her, and she didn't tell the police about the other guy that had hit her either, because as far as she was concerned, it was bleeding, and it was bleeding from what had just happened. Next day, the police arrest Lucky Gordon. It goes to trial, and Lucky Gordon is convicted and for 3 years. And during the trial, Christine is asked, "But were there two men there? Were there two men, one called Benton, one called Kamachi?" And she said no. She sustained the lie. Now, the police knew the guys were there. The police knew because they'd arrested one, they had one in custody. They'd interviewed Lucky Gordon, and they knew the guys were there. But they didn't care, because what the police wanted was Lucky Gordon arrested. So they just wanted to go to trial and Lucky Gordon to be arrested. Chris did lie, and that is perjury. When Chris, very soon after the case, she was found, everyone suddenly came forward. The two guys came forward saying, "Hey, the press want to pay us lots of money to say that you're a liar and that we were there. If you give us some of the money that you've now got coming to you from all of these newspapers, then we won't say anything." Her agent came forward and said, "I've got you on tape saying that there were two guys at this assault and you were hiding them in the room next door. I want 15,000 of any money that you're going to be getting, otherwise I'm going to give them the tape." And suddenly Chris got herself stuck in this awful sort of dilemma where she was assaulted by a man who'd raped her and attacked her in the street, raped her on 2 occasions, and then finally had assaulted her. He was arrested, and she thought, and he'd gone to prison for 3 months, and suddenly she was in this situation where he was going to get off and she was going to go to prison. She was also probably the most hated woman in England at the time, partly because she'd had affairs with black guys from West India, and the public was just not up for that. So there's all of these things that sort of that played into this. So she pleaded guilty. It never played out in court, and she went to prison. She went to prison for 6 months. Now, I think she should never have gone to prison. I think what happened to her was just appalling. Nowadays, you have the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, and every case that goes before the Crown is vetted, and witnesses are given all of the legal protection they can. Back in 1963, you're a witness for the police. The only people you talk to are the police. The police tell you what to say. You stand up on trial or in the dock and you say your piece. Now, I've done this website because another reason was I got a call in December from the producers of the recent BBC drama. And one of the things that the producer said to me, and it floored me, was she said, well, we're talking about the police and their role in your mum going to prison, and how the police, told Christine to lie. And I was floored by this, and I thought, my God, that's just, Chris never said this. And I went back and I read everything that Chris had said, and she never focused on the police. She always focused on the injustice that she was attacked by Lucky Gordon. So then I went back and I read the trial transcripts, and I've actually published them. They're online as well. And they make awful reading. They make the reading of a woman who has been abused over a long period of time by this guy, and she lies in the transcript. That's why she goes to prison. What Chris used to say, though, was that she was the first person who ever went to prison for not saying that witnesses were at a scene of crime. And it never made any sense to people because it was out of context, because the real story is really complicated. It's complicated because it involves race, it involves grown men telling a young girl to lie, it involves the police telling a young girl, don't change your story now because we want to get a conviction, we want to get this guy off the streets. Interestingly, Chris then says that, well, when they were interviewing her about that night's attack, very quickly the police were only interested in asking, well, what was Lucky Gordon's relationship with Stephen Wood? And that's how that conversation went, and that's really what the police were interested in. It's a very sad story, because being convicted of perjury actually makes you a liar. And all through Chris's life, she was known as a prostitute and a liar. She wasn't a prostitute and she wasn't a liar. She was one of the most honest people I ever met. She was brutally honest. But the trial that she went through, although was entirely legal, wasn't entirely fair. Interestingly, though, one of the things that people do cite in the Stephen Ward trial was that when Christine was found guilty of perjury, or when Lucky Gordon rather was released because it was clear that Christine had perjured herself, the judge at that trial wrote to the trial judge, Stephen Ward. And in that, he didn't say, oh, one of the witnesses that you've got is a perjurer. What he said was, we're releasing this guy because there may be elements to the story that Christine has told that may need further investigation. In other words, he was really ambiguous about it. And people say that's because it was a setup and that the judge went light on the advice in the Stephen Ward case to make sure that Stephen Ward was found guilty. And I'm not sure that's true. Having read the trial notes, having read the transcripts, it could easily be as well that the essence of what Christine was saying was absolutely true. Lucky Gordon admits in court that he hit her. He admits in court that he injured her. And yet he got off. So, I think that Christine was put in an impossible situation. It never played out in open court. All of the abuse that she suffered under Lucky Gordon, under many men, never really played out in court. And I think that today she would be seen as a victim of a sex crime, of stalking, of harassment. And I would like Christine to get a pardon for going to prison for that perjury. I think there's much more to it. And I think, and I've laid that out on the website that I've got, along with the trial notes, along with Lucky Gordon's extensive criminal record against women as well. It just always struck Chris as a massive injustice that he got away scot-free.
You know what, Seymour, your mother would be so proud of you if she was alive today. So proud of you. It's so you're thinking behind the website, which is on our screen here, is want to clear her name.
Yeah, I'm putting forward the argument to clear her name. I have lots of stuff on there to show that she was an icon. So there's lots of positive stuff as well. Lots of nice stuff, characters that have played the part of Christine, the music that's been inspired by Christine and the Perfumo scandal, and also a timeline as well of events through her life, right up to 2047, when the papers that the government hold on the Perfumo scandal will finally be released to the public. And it's and on that timeline, I've just tried to be really accurate, 100%. If I can prove it, I'm not judging. It's just stuff that I know happened, that can be proved happened, and just to give a better idea of, and that's because so many people, when they report it, so many reporters, when they write about it, they actually get the story a bit wrong. I'm really pleased with what we've done on that.
Your mother passed away how many years ago?
2 years ago. 2 years,
2 years ago, and the funeral was quite a dignified funeral.
Yeah. It was. We went to Kensal Rise, and which is the local one for the Notting Hill area, and there was a procession from Ladbroke Grove, horse-drawn carriages right the way up to Kensal Rise, or Kensal Green, I think it is, and it was very, very nice, and then most recently we had the ashes, and I actually held on to the ashes for quite a long time before we did anything with them, and that was because in Christine's will, she made a comment, and it didn't hit me immediately, but in it said that I leave to my son the task of telling the truth.
Wow.
And I didn't know what that meant for a long time. I didn't really know what that meant until I had a direction, and when I had that direction, we were able to do a little ceremony and then scatter her ashes on the Thames, where she grew up, where she played as a kid, where she was happy as a child, and it was also something that she'd asked in a note. Can my ashes be scattered where I grew up on the River Thames? And so we did that, and it was myself, my wife, and her granddaughter, and it was very moving, and hopefully she finds rest, and hopefully she finds some peace.
What's your most fondest memory of her between you two?
Well, laughing. So my fondest memory would be we were very poor. We were very, very poor for a long period of time, Saf. And we had an old TV that, I don't know if you remember the 70s. Everything you bought in the 70s didn't come with a plug. Right? So you had to hold two wires out and push them into a socket in the wall and jam stuff in to get the power into it. And it was just the way that we were doing it. And one day Chris was doing this with the TV, and she suddenly made a terrible noise, and she fell backward on the floor and started shaking. And I thought I was about 8. And I thought my mum was dead. I thought, she's had an electric shock. And so I run over, Mum, are you okay? And she just started laughing. She was playing just a horrible little practical joke on a small child. So what I did is I got a felt tip pen, and all over my veins on my arm, I just coloured them in very delicately. And I went to my mum and said, Mum, what is this? And I don't know. I said, it's just come up, it really hurts. And she marched me off to hospital. And we're walking to hospital, and we're just at the gates of the hospital. And I say, Mum, this is a joke. I can rock this off. Look. Oh, Jesus, and we laughed. And I said, that was what you did to me. So
you had a great relationship. I've got a few comments which I may read. This is just from this platform, but from all the other platforms, I don't know, there's probably loads of comments. And I won't say their surnames.
You're watching this, you didn't tell me that.
Yeah, I won't say their surnames because they may not want me to show up. To be fair, they put it on, so I will say it. Elaine Leonard, does that ring a bell?
No.
Elaine Leonard has put just 4 hearts.
Oh, that's lovely.
Sherry Daniels. Hello everyone, Sherry here from Canada. Hope everyone is well. Sherry Daniels also put "that's sick," and that was about the time when I think you were talking about the accusations towards her and the insults that were going on. So she's we've got Rebecca Dalton Bex, who I know very well personally, my friend and a good friend of mine. She said, "What a story, compelling to listen to. Your connection is awesome." Becky Flint, does that name ring a bell to you?
I know Becky. Yeah,
Becky says Seymour Platt is incredible in the way he talks about his mother. She would be incredibly proud of how he has told the truth and actioned what she asked of him in her will. Beautiful. And an old school friend of ours has put a message. Simon London. That name rings a bell to you.
Simon, yeah.
Simon saying, "Hi guys, I arrived late. Sorry." Typical Simon. Your mother was a fascinating woman, Seymour. History has been more sympathetic to her. In fact, with the last BBC drama, I would go as far as to say she was portrayed very much as a victim, and Stephen Ward more of a Machiavellian character than played by Hurt in Scandal. Would a pardon really make all the difference? And I ask that respectfully, not in an accusing tone.
No, that is a really good question. Do I think I'm going to get a pardon?
What? No, he's saying, would it make a difference? What would it make a difference?
Yeah. And he's got a really strong point on that, because but what I really want is for people to, and I've said this before, I'd love a pardon. I'd love to ask for pardon, but I would love, as the drama did, just to change the colour of the water around my mum, so that when people do mention her name, it's not with any of the awful associations that have happened through history or her history. It's maybe with a little bit more kindness, a little bit more understanding. So yeah.
Well, you know what? It's been so great having you on the show, Seymour. It really has. And if people want to learn more and see more about Christine, please check the website www.christine-keeler.co.uk. If you want to hear any more or want to speak to Seymour, you can find him on Facebook. You can go through me, go to my website, Saf Surgery, saf-surgery.com, and we can maybe answer your questions.
Oh, yeah.
Any last
There's
words?
only one Seymour.
Yeah, exactly. Any last words or you want to say about your mother?
Actually, I'd just like to say a big thank you to you. Thank you very much for having me on your show. I really appreciate it. I watch it. I do dip in from time to time. It's very good, and just the best luck. And we've got to keep in contact, keep this going.
Definitely, and I'm so happy that and honoured to have you on my show, and what, to say the stuff about your mum that people may not have necessarily known, but also to say her side of the story, even though she's not here with us today. She's definitely here with you today. Thank you very much, Seymour. And lots of love to you. And your mother was an incredible person, and you are an inspiration. And that story was inspirational. And what you're doing is great. And if anything, I hope at the very least you get serenity from this. We haven't talked about how it really affected you and the moments that your mum and yourself may have had, and maybe some tears in there as well. But I wanted to hear the good side, and the side that you've said is just wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys. That's another episode. Inspirational people, inspirational stories. Next week, we've got another inspirational guest, but I won't tell you who it is. Just watch out for all the adverts. See you later, guys. God bless. Thanks, Seymour.
Right.